Well, I will go ahead and introduce our next speaker, our last speaker of the day. Michael Sodaro is a professor of political science and international affairs at the George Washington University. And his expertise includes comparative and international politics in Europe and Russia, with teaching interest in international relations and comparative politics. I should also add that he is also going to be working with us on the Euro Challenge competition, and he's one of the partner organizations, GW University. And yeah, great. So I will give you the floor.
Amanda, thanks very, very much. Appreciate you being here. You got the tip on the head. Yeah, I think that's good. Well, Amanda, Amy, and I have cooked up a surprise for you. They've asked me to start by administering a quiz on Amy's presentation. So you just take out some paper. The euro is. Oh, thank you. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about the euro and if your students are going to get involved in this program, this book just came out in August. I'm using it at GW for my undergraduate and graduate classes over here for evening. The author is David Marsh, M-A-R-S-H, and it's just called The Euro, Yale University Press paperback. And it explains the history of it in pretty clear terms. Again, the author is David Marsh, M-A-R-S-H. There's that paperback. Picking up on the last questions that was asked, is this something new? In the global economy, I think if you're going to try to recruit students for the Euro Challenge and hook them into what is really a very complicated issue, the number one lesson is this: we are not alone. The United States is not alone. Certainly with respect to economics, but also on the political side, as I will try to clarify today. There are a lot of things going on in the politics of these economic issues in the European countries that ring some bells in the United States. There are some similarities going on. Just to put the cart before the horse a little bit, there is a very fierce anti-incumbent mood in just about every European country. Guess what Europeans don't like? Bailouts. Okay? And if you think the Tea Party is a uniquely American phenomenon, I'm going to get you to think again about that. So that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. Now, I have not a PowerPoint presentation, but there is in your packet a handout. And it's somewhere in the back of your packet.
Yeah, it's on the left side, second to last document.
Okay. And I probably have TMI as far as some of these countries are concerned. But if you need the information, it's there. Okay. It starts off with U.S.-EU economic ties. And, this is one of the things that students really need to understand, that the United States is part of a broader global economy, and that we are immersed. We share a lot of problems that the Europeans have. The problems that we've encountered this past year over the debt and what to do about extending the debt. A very big political football. It's going to be for quite some time in this country. It's the same in Europe. It's the same in Europe. And the politics of deficits, of budget deficits, and how we deal with it. How we deal with these deficits over the years. We're going to have perhaps less money to spend. Budgets have to be cut. Taxes have to be raised. How else do we deal with budget deficits? Nobody likes it. Nobody likes their programs cut. Who wants to pay more taxes? The rich? No. The rest of us? No. So the same is going on in Europe. These are very, very similar problems. So for one way in which, as I've taught comparative politics for many years, one way in which American students can understand the United States better is to look at the U.S. in comparative perspective, to see what's going on in countries that were relatively like us, certainly in terms of economic development, like Europe. So they're going to learn a little bit more about the United States. Again, I think they're going to learn a lot about it if they get to this program. To come back to the theme of we are not alone, take a look at page 1, and you'll get an idea of how important U.S.-EU economic ties are. Okay? It's very big business. The European Union, all 27 as a bloc, are our largest trading partner. Okay? Let's take a look at the money that's going around here. In 2010, the United States exported about $250 billion worth of goods to the EU. That hires a lot of Americans. In fact, there are statistics on how many millions of Americans are employed in the United States whose companies deal with Eurozone. EU exports to the U.S. $319 billion. As you can see, we have a trade imbalance in New York State, where it has been for a long time. It's not just Japan that has this imbalance with us, and we have with them. In trade and services, where we do a little bit better, because services includes video games and tourism services, and banking, and movies. U.S. exports to the EU, I have this figure of all of the EU website in euro, 131 billion euros worth of U.S. exports to the EU, just in 2010. EU exports to the U.S., 125 billion. More than 20% of all U.S. exports go to Europe, basically, meaning that's our number one country trade partner. 14% of U.S. exports goes to the 17 Eurozone countries alone. And we were doing very, very well before the economic crisis hit here and in Europe around 2007. U.S. exports to the EU are growing. They grew more than 16% in 2006, more than 15% in 2007. Then they fell. They fell like 11% in the first half of 2008. And now they're picking up again. From January to August of this year, U.S. exports to the EU were up 15% over an equivalent time last year. Now, trade, exports, imports are not even half the story. Most EU-U.S. economic transactions are in the form of investments. What EU companies and governments own in the United States and vice versa. The activity of subsidiaries and so forth. Part of General Motors' ability to pay off the bailout got was due to the fact that its European affiliate, they make the Opel, and Europe was doing fairly well for a while now. Opel sales are down, from what I understand. But investment is very heavy. U.S. investment, EU investment flows to the U.S. in 2009, 80 billion. U.S. flows 97 billion. There's more economic activity behind this. Look at this. The European Union is the number one or number two export market for 46 U.S. states. I'm pretty sure they would include Virginia. EU companies are the number one international investors in 44 states. There's more EU investment in Texas than U.S. investment in Japan. And there are all kinds of figures like that. There's more U.S. investment, I think, in Germany than U.S. investment in the BRICS combined. The BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China. It's huge. So our economic interdependence with Europe is immense. And take a look at this. And in this current crisis, we're talking about U.S. banks. You know, the European governments that are in trouble, Greece, Italy, we'll get to that, they owe money to a lot of banks. You know, Italy owes hundreds of billions to French banks in France, and hundreds of billions to German banks. This goes back and forth. Well, U.S. banks are involved in this current issue. So take a look at this. U.S. banks loans to Italy, currently about $50 billion. This was just in a USA Today article that I pulled off the web yesterday. Spain, $50 billion. France, $300. Germany, $300. And English is such a inventive language. You know, the 5 countries that are most in trouble in Europe are known euphemistically as the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. So, U.S. banks have lent money to them. Again, this was in the USA Today article. Just pull that over to it. Bank of America, $16.7 billion. Morgan, 14. Citi, 13.5. Volkswagen, and so on. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but in the early 2000s, right after Greece came into the euro, because Greece was not one of the first 11 euro countries, it was number 12. And as Amy said, very diplomatically, but I don't think that's what I like diplomatic. The Greek government deliberately lied to the EU when it came into the European Union. And that fact was revealed by a subsequent government of an opposition party a couple of years ago. But they lied, and I'll go into that a little bit. Shortly after the Greek government came into the euro, Goldman Sachs made a secret deal with the Greek government and let the Greeks certainly hundreds of billions. And this was kept quiet by the Greek government. The government did it for Parliament. It came out later. And what did Goldman get out of it? It later became disclosed that the Greeks agreed to hand over to Goldman, as necessary, the revenue from the Greek National Lottery and the Greek National Airport. This was not disclosed to the Greek people. So Goldman has been involved in this. Let me ask you this. Has the United States already contributed money to the bailouts of Greece, Ireland, Portugal? Have we? The initial bailouts were not limited to EU money. The International Monetary Fund also put money into these bailouts, and the United States helps fund the IMF to the tune of 17% of its assets. So yes, American money is already going to that. In fact, just the other day, the United States has been under pressure to help the IMF contribute even more and have a special program to funnel more money into Europe. The Obama administration said, no thanks. We're not going to do that. We believe that the Europeans can, handle this themselves, although again, we are involved. So in approaching your students about this, and granted all the complexities of it, they'll learn this. They'll learn this. I was invited by Amy to just observe some of the high school teams who came to Washington last spring, and I was amazed. These 14 and 15-year-old kids are sounding like IMF executive directors. It's just extraordinary. I talked to them, they said they just learned it over the course of the years. It's extraordinary what they can learn if they're pushed. But again, the big hook is, yes, they are involved, and they have to understand the extent to which the U.S. economy and the European economy, and not just the European, the Chinese, so on, we're all part of this global economy. It's not just the U.S. Are they aware that Burger King is owned by a British company? That T-Mobile is a German company? That AIG, which American taxpayers helped bail out, was originally a European company? Okay? So your kids are going to have to find their place in this increasingly complex and increasingly intersecting global economy. And as Amy mentioned at the end, where are the Europeans going to go to get the money that they need to recapitalize the banks and get out of this mess? Give me a C, give me an H, give me an I. So they're increasingly beholden to the Chinese, as are we now. What's in it for China? I agree with Amy. They're not necessarily going to start up something like Taiwan. Give us Taiwan, or we're not going to give you any more money, or we're going to call in our chips. And one way to think of it from the Chinese perspective is like this. If I owe you $100, that's my problem. If I owe you $1 million, that's your problem. Because if one day I say, I don't have it, I'm defaulting. Goodbye. So the Chinese don't want to, or going to give money, loans, but they've got considerations as well. They're part of the interdependency. Now, as I said, another aspect of this current euro crisis that sheds light on our problems is on the next page. Now, Amy mentioned that when the euro was established, there were certain convergence criteria, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details about this, but basically the idea was this. The European Union countries agreed in the early 1990s, but there were only 15 of them. Communism was just as a process of collapsing, so the East Europeans were being in. There were 15, basically, West European countries in the early 1990s when they all agreed to establish the euro, although the Brits decided, we don't want it. And the Brits are really thanking themselves. And they can get into it. David Cameron, in fact, just to make some statements, which is essentially he's gloating over the fact that Britain still has the pound. And by the way, Amy had a nice photograph of Merkel and the Greek Prime Minister. Here's one that I saw recently. This is Sarkozy and Merkel smooching at one of their meetings. You know, these issues can be diplomatically very, very tough. This just was in Foreign Policy magazine, foreignpolicy.com. At the recent meetings at which they agreed on this latest bailout plan, Sarkozy is quoted as telling Cameron, quote, "You have lost a good opportunity to shut up. We are sick of you criticizing us and telling us what to do. You say you hate the euro, and now you want to interfere in our meetings." These are politically contentious issues. They're very, very tough. And in fact, just the other day, or last weekend rather, Sarkozy and Merkel told Berlusconi, come with us, and the three of them sat down, and Sarkozy and Merkel told Berlusconi basically what he has to do in terms of doing Italy's share to deal with its own problems. And this was widely reported all over this, as a quote-unquote humiliation for Berlusconi, who was never at a loss for words, so he came out and tried to blame the whole thing on the French and German banks. But he's not going to be able to swerve out of this. So one of the problems that has really come to a head centers on these convergence criteria that were established in the early 90s when Italy and Germany and France, they all agreed they would set up the euro. And it was the German federal bank that, at the time, the German Bundesbank, that insisted on very stiff rules for any common currency. Because the Deutsche Mark was the strongest currency in Europe. And the Germans were afraid that if they all agreed on a common currency, there might be too much inflation. So the Germans don't like inflation. And they wanted to have very stiff anti-inflationary measures in any set of rules concerning the euro. Well, to cut to the chase, let me concentrate on two of the most important rules that they agreed on when they set up the criteria for joining the euro in the first place, and that still applies. Criteria number one, thou shalt not run an annual budget deficit in excess of 3% of your GDP. No budget deficit, annual national government budget deficit in excess of 3% GDP. Well, that's tough. That's hard to do. So the Germans said, we're not going to go for this unless there's an agreement on it. And Italy, frankly, Italy made it. But there was a second criterion. There are others, but I'll concentrate on this. There's a second big criterion was, thou shalt not have an accumulated national debt, that is all that you owe, whether it's to foreigners, foreign investors, or to pensioners in your social security system, as Amy suggested. There are different ways of measuring national debt. Without getting into that, the essence of it was, thou shalt not run a total national debt over, that exceeds 100% of your GDP. Okay? Now, again, these were tough measures, and Italy already failed by that measure. Italy was already overrun. Slightly over the time. And when the euro was being established in those days, it was clear France was going to be it, Germany was going to be it, the Brits said no. Belgium wasn't, but Netherlands sure. What about Italy? And it was touch and go. And there are some people who say Italy did some fancy bookkeeping activities to get it. Anyways, everybody knew that Italy, for political reasons, had to be in. So Italy came in, but not Greece initially. All right? Greece did not meet all the convergence criteria. And as I indicated, when the fund did come in, it was only a year or two later, they lied. Now, Amy made a reference to a situation that occurred earlier this decade. Around 2002, 2003, France and Germany were undergoing a recession, and their budget deficits slipped slightly above 3%. Well, now what? What happens if a country violates the rules that they've agreed on? Well, the Germans saw to it that there would be provisions for that as well, that there would be penalties. They agreed on what was called a Stability and Growth Pact. So the Stability and Growth Pact basically said, if you're undergoing a recession, okay, you have a little bit of latitude, but you've got to get back under that 3% margin, A and B. Well, France and Germany did not. Now, under the rules, the European Commission in Brussels, which is the European part of the EU, has the authority to enforce the rules. That's what the Commission does. In addition to having this nice delegation here, the Commission proposes policies to the member states, but all policy decisions, the rules, the laws are taken by the member states, even on a basis of unanimity or weighted voting, without going to that. But it's the countries that make the decisions. The Commission just proposes, the countries make the decisions in the Council of Ministers, and then once they've made the decisions, the Commission then is charged with enforcing them. So when France and Germany exceeded the 3% limit, it was thereupon up to the Commission to enforce the rules. And the rules said countries that are really in violation have to pay a fine. It was an EU pot. France refused to pay. Germany refused to pay. Why? We're France and Germany. That's why. I should have said, but these are the rules you wanted. France and Germany basically said, we ain't Luxembourg. We're not going to pay. So the Commission has the right to, quote unquote, sue, that's not the word we use, to bring an action against member states in violation of EU rules before the European Court of Justice, whose job it is to interpret the EU laws and issue rulings. It's very supranational. Imagine the United States of America being under a supranational court. And under EU law, states are obligated to follow EU Court, European Court of Justice rulings. All right? Because European Union law supersedes national law. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing, this European Union. Just imagine, ask your kids, should the United States form a similar union with Canada and Mexico? Should we get rid of the dollar and have a common currency with Canada and Mexico? What would that be? So anyway, the Commission took France and Germany, well, the whole Council of Ministers before the Court of Justice. The Court of Justice said to the Commission, you're right. They're violating the rules. So what did France and Germany do? Change the rules. They got the other governments to agree to loosen the rules, which were tight, especially in a recession, to loosen the rules that allow countries this latitude to violate this 3% limit in the event of what they call exceptional circumstances. Well, now they're all under exceptional circumstances. So take a look at the second page, and this is one of the main problems that's at issue. Okay, so I've got the deficit to GDP ratio. So this is the deficit, the annual deficit for 2009 and 2010 as a percentage of GDP. and the countries with an asterisk are the Eurozone countries. So Austria, slightly above. Belgium, slightly above. Bulgaria, not too bad. Czech Republic, slightly above. But no, they're above. There's only one country in surplus, and that's Estonia. And they are a new Euro. Finland. I'll come back to Finland. This is important. Finland is up there. And I'll tell you, the Finnish voters are rioting. That's where they have their own team. France, well above. Germany. Those Germans. This is why Merkel can lecture the rest of them. If I've learned anything in 40 years of studying political science, it's the powerful are stronger than the weak. Greece, there's the problem. See the Greek problem here? One. Okay? 15.4% last year. They're down to 10. But they're well above. And it's going to take them a long time to get them back. Hungary, not too bad. Ireland, problem. Worse. Terrible. Italy, not too bad. But Italy's problem is on the right-hand column. Latvia, Latvia has been hit. Latvia, depending on how you measure it, Latvia is the poorest country in the EU. Slovakia is the next poorest. There are others who qualify for being fairly low. But anyway, the economic crisis has hit all these countries very hard. Hit Latvia very hard. The Baltic state, formerly part of the USSR, as Dan mentioned. There were riots in early 2009 against the government, and they've undergone repeated government changes. We just had an election. Latvia got an IMF bailout. And as Barroso pointed out recently, the economy is picking up. Barroso gave a speech recently in which he said, these bailouts do work. And to look at Latvia, Lithuania up there. Luxembourg, okay, small little Luxembourg, doing very good. Malta, not too bad. Netherlands, not too bad, but they're over. Poland is over. Portugal, Romania, okay? Slovakia we'll get to. Spain, not too good. Sweden, very good. And this is a country that, in our generation, we tend to think of it as being a free-spending welfare state, cradle to grave. And they've had a coalition right-wing, center-right governments for recent years. The Swedes love their welfare benefits, but they got tired of paying higher taxes for them. So the Social Democrats, the center-left party that brought the welfare state to Sweden, probably voted out. And the center-right government, this is another interesting comparison to the United States here. Most of the center-right parties in the United States, quote-unquote equivalent of our Republican Party, are not against the welfare state. Sarkozy is not against the welfare state. Europeans pay high taxes, they want their welfare benefits, and depending on the country and depending on the public opinion polls, a lot of Europeans, sometimes the majority, say they would be willing to pay more taxes if they get benefits in return. Well, anyway, Sweden has its welfare state, but it's balancing its books. Britain, without the euro, not in good shape. How's the United States doing by comparison? 12.3% deficit to GDP ratio in 2009. In 2010, to dispute my figures, consult the CIA. 8.8. And now let's take a look at the other. So this gives you an idea of what one of the major problems is. But this is not just a European problem. It's not just a U.S. problem. This is something that we're all in this soup now. And our voters, your students, as they grow up, our politicians are going to have to deal with the complexities of these problems because, again, they make people mad everywhere. Nobody wants to see cuts to their program. Yeah, and in the United States and all these European countries, you look at the polls. Are you in favor of spending cuts? Yeah. What do you want to cut? His program. Her program. Okay? Don't cut the military. That's me. Cut education and transportation. Don't cut transportation. I live in Virginia. I live in Maryland. Don't cut transportation. Cut the military. Well, And who wants to pay higher taxes? It's the same issues in Europe. The same. And they're dealt with in different ways in different countries. Now, let's take a look at the right-hand column. This other big convergence criteria. And again, they agreed on this in the 90s, and they still apply. Thou shalt not run a total amassed national debt in excess of 100% of your last year's GDP. All right? Let's just go down. Look, Belgium is close, Bulgaria is close. Yeah. But look at Greece. This is another one of the problems. Way up there. And the agreement that was reached is on Wednesday by the heads of state. Again, coming back to the wonders of the English language. When what's called officially the European Council, the European Council are the leaders of all the EU countries, prime ministers, Merkel, Sarkozy, and so on. In English, they are known affectionately as the heads of government and state, or hogs. So the hogs, when they met, when the hogs met, the deal that they cut, and literally cut, is, as Amy pointed out, they're going to try to get the banks to whom Greece owes money to write off 50% of the loans. Well, hey, that's a kind of a default, mini default. They're saying, oh, we're not going to default. That's what we're talking about. Everybody retired from the state economy. It's a default. Mini default. So the banks are going to have to take what they call in Europe a haircut, 50% haircut. But the plan is to bring down this number to 120% by 2020. Yes.
That's it?
Yes. They hope to do that. That's the stated goal. So it's going to take years, okay? Years. And look, okay, then Italy, another problem. Italy has a number of problems, as Amy mentioned, but it has high pension obligations and so on. You can retire in Italy. Women can retire at 60, men at 65. Merkel and the Sarkozy and others have been pressuring Berlusconi to raise the retirement age to 67. He said he's willing to do that starting in 2026. He's not in the United States. America has plenty. It's very commonly used. It's what I call the Italian solution. Whenever there's a controversial solution, okay, we'll do it 50 years from now. But even with us, we're going to raise the retirement age. Everybody knows that. And we're not going to do it overnight. No politician is going to go to people and say, starting next year, it's going to be 70. But it's coming. It's coming. So, yes.
That 120% rule, is that apply only to
Greece.
Only to Greece. It doesn't apply to the
No, it's not. It's not a rule. It's a target that we're trying to get, because it's over 140% now, and Italy is already, teetering on 100. Yes.
From what I understand, Greece is something of an outlier with respect to how many people are actually on public payroll.
Yeah. Yes and no. There are a lot of. It's the worst. It's the most egregious.
And they have the
1
clergy.
out of 5 employed people in Greece work for the pay taxes. Okay?
They don't pay taxes.
And in Greece, as they say in Italy, they say taxes and red lines are suggestions. Greece too, very poor. I think it's something like $20 billion a year in unpaid taxes that should be paid. That's one instance that I've seen. But 1 out of 5, and I've got by the way, I have a bunch of articles that I this is for you and for your students. If you want to follow these issues on a day-to-day basis, there's the EU website. But really, in my view, this personal opinion, the best internet newspaper covering the EU and European countries is EURactiv.com. It's EUR, one word, EURACTIV, EURactiv, but without an E, EURACTIV.com. It's excellent. And there's all kinds of dossiers that explain these issues in very clear terms, and day-to-day coverage of hundreds of EU issues. Yes.
I mean, when you mentioned raising retirement age, which makes sense in terms of making that work. But I mean, there also is the other side. If old people keep working, then doesn't that prevent growth? Because where do the young people find jobs? I mean,
Yeah,
the
they
French
don't-
students made that argument last year.
Yeah, it's tough, that's right. But you know, there are a lot of Italians who had retired 50. There are a lot of French and Greeks who retired in their 50s, depending on the geography.
But the youth has.
And France has tried, French governments have tried to raise retirement.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Too much opposition. You know, the French demonstrate.
But some of
They'll
them,
bus people into Paris from all over,
Yeah.
and put 100,000 people on the streets. of
some of
Paris.
those people
That's
were
it.
students, and they saw it as, I mean,
Yeah,
they
students don't want to think about retirement.
no, but they want jobs.
They want jobs, but this is why they have to get into something like this. They've got to see these connections. And this will help them see those connections. And it'll help them start planning their retirement in their freshman year of high school.
Work from home.
So, as you can see, UK aid. Look at the United States now. It's our total debt now is what, 13 trillion, and that's our GDP, about 100%. So you see, the United States is. Who would have thought to look at these statistics? As Amy said, we don't necessarily collect statistics on it. But you know, looking at these Euro convergence criteria and seeing how we stack up to them shows you, gives you an idea of where we are. Okay. Now, back to Greece. One of these articles that I brought is particularly on that subject. The EU has told the Greek now there are two main political parties in Greece: the center-left PASOK, which is in power now, and the center-right party, New Democracy. They both, for decades, since the end of the war, started hiring people, hiring the unemployed and putting them, giving government jobs. And everybody knows that in Greece there are a lot of bureaucrats who do nothing. They really have nothing to do, but they're on the table. And both parties have done this. The curry favor and does. Politics, right? It's a democracy. And the EU has told Greece, you've got to cut 30,000 public sector jobs right now. Since the bailout of 2010, you know how many have been fired? No. People are demonstrating in the streets. You know, they're using tear gas. People don't want to lose their jobs. And the Greek economy is going to be in a mess. You know, Greece doesn't have a big export economy. They used to have a big shipping operation up until the 60s or so. That's how, you know, Onassis was able to afford Jackie Kennedy and the Eurc and all that. Well, once the Japanese started with containerization, that killed the Greek shipping industry. And what do they have? Tourism, not a big export industry. So Greece is going to be in for some serious stuff. Yes.
In light of the figures that you have here for the U.S., are any of the plans that are being floated around now viable for the U.S. to lower its rates?
The U.S., as Amy pointed out, we're in a more privileged position. Why? Again, powerful and stronger than people will buy our bonds. Even though Moody's downgraded us, bond sales have gone up. But when Moody's downgraded these countries, they're in more trouble.
The stock market went up the other day.
Yeah, on the news of this.
Right,
It's like a delirium.
On the cover of Time for last week was the story of China and the bubble that's ready to burst.
There.
China, the relationship to China and the U.S. and the debt. The U.S. is terribly in debt to China, and if that bubble bursts, as is being predicted, where does that then leave the U.S. in the midst of all?
And where does it leave China? I see the article talking about the bubble, meaning we're borrowing too much from China.
No, there are markets and economies that's over getting ready to burst. It's not what it always cracked up to be.
China.
Yeah, China's
Yeah, well, China.
It's all in.
Rich.
Well, what relationship does that have then with America? The American debt that soars more because China defaults.
It's not China's good. China is owed. China is a credit debt.
But she can't give them money from America because they're screaming about cutting everything.
I don't know. I'll be honest. All right, I just have a few more minutes, so I'm going to very quickly get into the politics of this issue. Just go over some of these countries. So Greece, a lot of these facts you have in here. So Greece, one of the points I want to stress in this portion of my talk is that a lot of European countries, particularly the ones in trouble, but also some of the donor countries, have problems. Political problems. Okay? There's a lot of political problems. So let's take a look at Greece. Now, are you familiar with the way parliamentary systems work? Because as I said, students may or may not be, but this is something that need to know. Most European governments have a parliamentary system. In essence, people vote for the parties, whichever party or combination of parties can get more than 50% of the seats they want to get. If they fall below that in the parliament, they can be out. Happens a lot. So in Greece, the last elections were in 2009, and it's basically there are some smaller parties, but the two main ones, the center-left, Papandreou's father was prime minister back in the 80s. He was at Berkeley for many years. He was outspokenly anti-US on a lot of things. And then the New Democracy Party, under Karamanlis, his uncle was the president. So he disclosed in 2009 that the Greeks lied again in 2009 that Greece's deficit was in fact 12.7% of GDP, not 6%, as his government had previously reported to the European Union, knowing this. So the total debt reached 126 billion in January, as you can see it's higher now. And then in May of 2010, when this thing hit, the other EU countries realized we're all in this euro together. And if Greece goes down, this whole experiment fails. And by the way, when they were putting the euro together in the 90s, the consensus in Washington was it would fail. People in the State Department, a lot of American economists thought too many countries in this. It's going to be hard to coordinate. This is before Greece. But it has proved to be a big success. And talking about the exchange rate, did you ask questions about the exchange rate earlier? I was in Europe in 2002 when it finally became used as a currency, bills, coins. It was 1-to-1. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Well, now, it's a balance between 140 and 150. It's gone down to 130 something else, back to 140. So it's a lot. So tax evasion. Now, Papandreou, getting to the politics of this, Obama been trying to get the Republicans to work together to deal with our debt. We know what's happened, right? Same deal. Papandreou told New Democracy, the right-wing party, listen, why don't we form a joint national unity coalition? We'll all get together and figure a way out of this. New Democracy said hell no. And it's been voting against all these austerity measures, knowing full well that they're complicit. They're complicit too. This has been going. This isn't new. This has been building up for 30 years. These excess spending and insufficient revenue. So in 2010, the EU put together an initial rescue package along with the IMF. So U.S. dollars were in there. So now PASOK, there are 300 seats in the parliament. PASOK has 153. It's had some defections because even some people in their party disagree with what's going on. They don't want the austerity measures. They're getting flack from their voters, some of whom are out there demonstrating. And PASOK is the center of the party. It's the party of the, bottom half of the pyramid, right? So like the Democrats, you can't go. It's hard for them to do it. These people say, we're going to fire 30,000 of you tomorrow. It's hard to do. And raise taxes. Okay, so there's the haircut. Now, Ireland, as Amy indicated, has had a different problem. Ireland's problem, in a way, started out something like ours. Banks were heavily invested in a big real estate bubble. Prices were going up. Banks were buying property, giving mortgages, and then boom, prices come down. Banks are left holding all these bad loans, so they had to be bailed out by the Irish government. Ultimately, the Irish government nationalized one bank and has had to provide capital for 5 others. So it's 6 banks now, and Ireland ran out of money to do this. Plus, there were other problems too. And Ireland was, as Amy said, was one of the main beneficiaries of the European Union. Ireland was a poor country, 70s. And Ireland has a kind of a Rick Perry strategy for building up its economy. It has much lower corporate business taxes, and it's attracted, Bill Gates and big high-tech companies. And the other Europeans, the continental Europeans, are made of the Irish revenue, so the taxes are raise them. But anyway, this crisis hit them very hard. So what happened? The prime minister at the time was Brian Cowen. And what could he do? The government was out of money. What did he do? So he went to the EU and the IMF, 85 billion euro bailout. And of course, voters are mad. So they voted him out. And now there is a coalition government of another center-right party and the main center-left party, the Irish Labour Party. This would be the equivalent of the Democrats and the Republicans forming a coalition government. I know, it's a crazy idea. But that's what they're doing in Ireland. As you'll see, they're doing it in Finland, and they've done it in Germany. So not all countries are like the United States of America, where a complete political breakdown. And in Germany, as you'll see, Merkel got the cooperation of her main opposition party, the Senate Social Democrats, for this huge bailout, which is extremely unpopular anyway. So there's a new Irish prime minister, and good luck. But it's a coalition government of two parties. We'll say Portugal. Again, very complicated. I'm not going to go into all the details, but also a banking crisis, hit hard by the economic crisis. Debt goes up, deficit goes up. And by the way, there is no common EU euro bond. All the other countries sell their own bonds in what we call treasury bills. That's how we get close to the Chinese and sell the treasury bills at interest, right? And the higher the interest, we have to pay, the worse it is for us. And the interest rates have been coming down since Moody's downgraded us for the United States. But for these other countries, they've gone way up. People stop buying Greek bonds. Would you buy a Greek bond? I mean, how do you know if they're going to pay you back, right? Now, there has been some talk of creating a common euro bond. But so far, the two countries that really matter in this, France and Germany, because they've got the bucks for the euros, have said no. Anyway, Portugal's government, I'll get to your question in a second. Let me take it.
Well, I was just going to say back to the imperative to recapitalize the banks, and of course the Chinese are going to participate in that, but what about if it's a sovereign act to do that, who's going to do it? What's the incentive
For China to do it?
No. The previous speaker made the point that the capitalization, so to go in June of whatever year that was, they were going to capitalize, that was one of the EU overall, revisions ideas that it was supposed to work. So where does that money come from? And you suggested the Chinese, but if they don't have a bond right now, what is the real incentive for each individual sovereign bank country?
They'll work out some kind of instrument. They'll work out a kind of instrument. What's your China's going to go? It's not going to be a gift.
It's really going to be China all in all.
Not entirely. As you said, they're going to go to other governments as well if they have some money. Yes.
Don't the Chinese also devaluate their money?
Yeah. Well, they won't. I mean, they won't. They're refused. We want them to. The world wants them to. They devalue, but they won't. So anyway, Portugal's government had to get some austerity measures passed. Couldn't do it. And here's another example of a government that lost power over this issue. Okay? So if you're looking at prospects for Iraq, I mean, it's going to be tough. Because governments in power take the blame, whether it's their fault or not. That's the lesson. Italy, I won't go into a lot of detail, but Italy, is a mess. And as I said, Merkel and Sarkozy sat down with Berlusconi, who has his own problems. He himself has estimated that he's been subjected to over 570 investigations over various illegal actions and so on, going back decades. The most salacious, of course, is he's been having what he himself calls bunga bunga parties, which people describe as orgies, at his villas, and he has been consorting with a young woman he met who was his dental hygienist. So I guess he invited her to bunga bunga parties, but she doubles as a prostitute, and she was 17 years old. So now there's a court case involved in all of this. So he's been involved in a lot of these things. It's not at all clear if he's going to survive. The next elections, maybe I have a mistake here, the next elections is 2012. They're not due until 2013. But if you look at the news today, people in his own party are pressuring him to get out because he's got his own problems. He's insulting, he made a horribly insulting comment about Merkel recently. And then he has his coalition partner, the Northern League, which is a semi-right-wing party, that once wanted to have the Venice area secede from him. They're very anti-Europe. They've always been anti-Europe. They've always been anti-Europe. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was in Italy, and they had a rally there. The party had a rally against the euro, and they were distributing their own fake money with the euro and a slash sign. But anyway, they refuse. They won't go along with the change in the retirement age. He can't. Berlusconi said that it's a done deal, but there are no details, and the leaders of the Northern League say, no, we don't want to reach the retirement. So how do you do that when there's a gridlock? You think gridlock is just a given for the American problem. It isn't. Spain, bottom line is, again, I don't have time to go into details, but the Spanish government has been running higher debts. Spain had a surplus in 2007, budget surplus, and Zapatero had won re-election. He was very popular. Center-left party, Spanish Socialist Party goes back to the 19th century. And he was very popular, especially because he opposed the war in Iraq. He was elected the first time only days after the Madrid terrorist train bombing, and he had pledged that if I'm elected, I'm going to pull Spanish troops out of Iraq, which the predecessor government had put in because Afdar, the prime minister, professor of Georgetown, went along with George Bush and Blair, the troops to Iraq. So he said he was very unpopular in Spain. He said, if we're elected, we're going to pull them out. He was elected, they pulled them out. But now, 81% disapproval rating. Yeah? Here today, gone tomorrow, right? More than 80% indicated they have little no confidence in him. Why? Because he's forcing them to confront hard choices. That was like, and nobody wants to do it. So now he announced that he's going to call early elections, and these systems you can call elections ahead of the set for snap elections. So they're going to have elections in November. They were due in March. Next year, they're going to have them in November. And the polls show that he's going to lose. Again, if you're in power and you have to do these things, people aren't going to win. Now, look at Germany. It's the largest country in the EU, 82 million, depending on how you measure it. The fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. The second, or maybe depending on how you measure it, the biggest exporting country in the world. Last year, they were number one. A growth rate of 3.6% in 2010. We would love to have a 3.6% growth rate. For a big economy, that's high. So that's a pretty thumping growth rate. Low inflation, a little bit over 1%. Relatively low unemployment, 6% in August. We've reached a point where 6% unemployment is low. But Germany is low. So naturally, Germany's doing the best, and you would expect the Germans to pay. Yes, I got to stop, right? Right, okay. But it's very unpopular. So when it was clear Greece was falling apart at the seams in 2010, and Sarkozy and Merkel got together, going to say they're up. We're in it, and so they came up with an initial rescue package Germany pledged 119 billion euros when this European Financial Stability Facility, I think in German it's all one word, was set up. Then in July it proved to be not enough for Greece. So in July they agreed to raise it to 211 billion. Now they've raised it to 1 trillion. Germany contributes, Germany's share is 27% of that. Well, in 2010, when this was happening, I saw public opinion polls in Germany that showed 90% of Germans against bailout. And now it's at least 60%. It's over 60%. Merkel has always been very, very popular. The first few years, and she was initially elected in 2005. You know, she was a physicist in East Germany, politician. So she comes in, you know, within a few years, she's chancellor. Not too long after the unification, she's chancellor. So she was getting 80% approval ratings. Even the opposition people liked her for years. And now she's taking this hit. Not because the German economy is bad, not because people don't like bailouts. Why should we Germans look at what we're doing? We're the 3% rule. Why can't the Greeks do it? Why can't the Italians do it? So this really does create a lot of political controversy. But fortunately for Merkel, in Germany, going back to the 60s, the main center-right party, her party, the Christian Democrats, a party that the U.S. government helped set up under a common article, and the Social Democrats, which is one of the oldest parties in the world, was back in 1975, they formed a coalition government back in the 60s when the economy was starting to tumble and they cut a deal. The Christian Democrats, which represented the business sector, said, okay, you come in, we'll share power, but you've got to keep your labor unions quiet. Because if they start striking and everything, and inflation is going to go up, we're all going to get hurt. So Germany has had a pretty much low inflation economy since the war. They worked very, very hard at it, but it's all based on this fundamental consensus between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. So that when these votes have come up, the Social Democrats have voted with Merkel. We don't do that here anymore. We used to. We don't do that here anymore. But there are Eurosceptics. There are a couple of Eurosceptics, including a professor. You can't trust this. There's a professor in Germany who's a known Eurosceptic, as they say. And he and a couple of other people went before the German Supreme Court, which can be besieged by citizens to see if actions by the government are constitutional. So everybody was on tenterhooks to see if the German Supreme Court would rule just a few months in September if these German bailouts, the German contributions to the bailouts, were constitutional in accordance with Germany. Because if the Supreme Court said no, then what? Then what happens to Greece? The court ruled, yes, they are constitutional, but the lower house of the legislature, the Bundestag, must give its approval and also have the right to make an input into it in the discussion stage. So when they met in Brussels, when the Hogs met in Brussels last Sunday, they couldn't really agree on anything because Merkel needed to go to the Bundestag on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, to ask for its approval. And she had the votes in her own coalition, Christian Democrats and Free Democrats. But the Social Democrats, quote unquote, did the right thing. They're her opponents. They love to be in power instead of her. They hope to beat her in the next elections. But what do you do in this situation? And the Social Democrats basically, well, of course we're going to come to the aid of the euro. And she gave a powerful speech in the Bundestag in which she said this is Europe's worst crisis since World War II. And she said, I quote her here, if there's no euro, there's no Europe. And the Social Democrats understood that. So they voted with her. Yeah, they had some criticism, of course. Merkel should have done this or that. But they voted with her. France, there's basic public acceptance. I'm going to very quickly hit on Slovakia and Finland. Amy mentioned Slovakia. There's a 4-party coalition government, okay? And in order for this big stability facility to take effect, Slovakia, as indicated, had to go along. It had the approval of all 27. And the prime minister signed on, goes back home and finds out that one of the 4 parties in her coalition objects. Why? We're the poorest country, or second poorest country in Europe. Why should our taxpayers have to bail out these other countries? That's our money. Okay. Heard this before? All right. So they pulled out. They have the vote. She loses. But before the vote, she said, this is such an important vote that I'm attaching the question of confidence in my government. Meaning, if this vote on the bailout fails, I'm going to resign. It failed by 21 votes. Her coalition partner pulled out. And the lead opposition party said, which voted against it, said, we're for it. We just want to bring this government down. So there are going to be anticipated elections. I think in March. Now he said it's mayor. He had been the prime minister before. He said, yeah, we're for it. We're for the stability fund. But it's time for a change of government. So he was either trying to negotiate his way into the coalition government or the elections going to be elected. And then finally Finland. Here's where we get to the Tea Party. Ever heard of the True Finns? Finland had regularly scheduled elections. Polls showed 60% of the Finns were against Finland's contribution to the bailout. Finland contributes 1.8% to the whole thing. But what's 1.8% of now, what is now, as of the other day, $1 trillion euros, $1.5 trillion. Okay, so the polls showed at the time of the Finnish election, 60% were against it. Most of the main parties recognized we don't like it, but we have to do it. Swallow the bitter pill, we have to do it. We're Finland, we're going to the Euro, we have to do it. But there was this little far-right party that had always been there called the True Finns. As you might imagine, they're an anti-immigrant party. Now, how many immigrants does Finland have? They don't like them. And they had 5 members of the parliament prior to these elections. But because they made their main issue opposition to the Portuguese bailout, which was coming up at the time, they got 450 million new voters, ended up with 19% of the total vote, finished third, beating out the main incumbent governing party. And so then it's time to form a government. Well, no one party had anything even close to 50%. What happened was, and the center-right and center-left parties agreed, we've got to keep the True Finns out. I mean, this is the Finnish Tea Party. We're going to keep them out. So they formed a 6-party coalition of center-left and center-right governments. They tried to get their share of the bailout reduced. It didn't happen. So they approved it. But the current polls show now that if an election were to hold today, the True Finns would finish first.
Where does that number come from?
Yes, that can't be right.
Which number?
Finland doesn't have 1.4 that woman.
I'm sorry, that must have been 45. Yeah, you're right.
Maybe not even 44.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
I think it's still
You're right.
Because we all sit here.
Anyway, we got 19%. We got 19%. And it's been close.
Like some of the stuff I have.
Okay, that's it.